Hello, I'm Jim Dedman with the National District Attorneys Association. This is the NDAA series, In Trial. Today we're going to be talking about music piracy, and we're pleased to have as our guest Deborah Robinson and Frank Walters from the Recording Industry Association of America. Deborah, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Well, I am regional counsel in the Anti-Piracy Division, the Legal Affairs Department, for the Central Region, which is basically the East Coast and the Midwest. It's 16 states in the District of Columbia. But before coming to the RIAA, I was a prosecutor in the city of Philadelphia, working for Lynn Abraham for 7 years. And before that, I worked at a law firm.
Frank.
My name is Frank Walters. I am the Director of Investigations for the Central Region. I work closely with Deborah. I supervise the hard goods piracy investigations within the same area, the Central Region. I've been here for 16 years. Prior to that, I spent 13 and a half years as a Maryland State Trooper, working a number of very complicated undercover investigations.
Well, so a lot of law enforcement and prosecution background here with what you guys do. Now, I'll have to tell you that when I was in the Memphis DA's office, people weren't exactly fighting to get into nonviolent crime or white-collar crime. What is it that you could bring to the DA's office that would make them appreciate what music piracy investigations can do for their regular criminal caseload?
Well, I think number one, it has to be stressed that this type of crime affects quality of life in the DA's jurisdictions, the cities in which they work and live. But the other thing is that it's a link to a lot of other crimes. And I tell the prosecutors and I tell the police officers that I work with all the time, use this type of crime as a tool. This might lead you to a drug investigation. It might allow you to have probable cause for a drug house. You couldn't get in before. Well, now you can get in by purchasing or doing undercover purchases of CDs. It also has links to some terrorist organizations for those federal prosecutors out there. There's a number of cases that we're working on right now. But what we're seeing is also a link to selling drugs with the CDs and some gun activity as well.
Frank, do you find that some of the people who may be on parole or probation or may have some crimes in their background, a murder, homicide, or whatever, might be gravitating to some of this type of piracy?
More often than not, we find that most of the defendants we deal with are recidivist. They have spent time incarcerated on much more serious crimes. We've had situations where there have been robberies, homicide, parolees. As Deborah stated, there are some sayings in certain parts of the jurisdiction when you buy a CD, would you like it with or without? The with is the CD enclosing a piece of crack or whatever the case may be. We continually, in working with law enforcement, find that these locations have everything from handguns to large quantities of narcotics, cocaine, marijuana, to counterfeit money. So it really goes the gamut on what can be found during one of these investigations.
So you're all going to tell us how we can use piracy investigations to take some of these people back off the street that are back on the street because we couldn't get them like we wanted to get them the first time.
That's correct.
That's correct.
Tell us about the RIAA. You know, what is that and what does it do?
Well, the RIAA is the Recording Industry Association of America. We are a trade association that represent the major recording companies in the United States that manufacture and distribute approximately 90% of all the recorded music in the United States. Of those member companies, we represent the major 4 companies, which includes companies like Universal, Warner Brothers, and such as those companies.
And what else do they do? They have something to do with the gold records?
Yeah, we do actually. People usually know us for the gold records, I'd say. And that's when an artist sells a certain number of albums. But we do some other things, like some research for consumers. Legislative issues are big for us because that's how we shape and make laws better for prosecutors to prosecute these cases and to make things better for the artist and for the consumer. But what the biggest division or the biggest unit in the company is anti-piracy. And that's where Frank and I work, in the anti-piracy division.
And your title involves investigation, so how does an investigation start?
Well, just to start out with, the Recording Industry Association of America Anti-Piracy Unit is a nationwide program. We have offices located in a number of major jurisdictions, Los Angeles, Atlanta, Miami, New York, Philadelphia, Texas. We have offices also in Chicago. So those offices are staffed by trained investigators, mostly retired law enforcement. So we are familiar with how to conduct an investigation, and our attempts are to present the investigation to law enforcement or to prosecutors as nearly in the complete state as possible when we have been proactive in those investigations. Our investigations can result from information from law enforcement, from confidential informants, or from our member companies. There are also situations where, based on a particular issue or problem in an area, our investigators begin a proactive action to identify suspects and to develop information that may result in arrest, search warrants, or such as that.
Okay, so Deborah, common situation, would I call you up and say, hey, I think I've got a case, or would you call me up and say, have I got a case for you?
Usually you call me and say, I think I have a case. Because what's going to happen is after the investigators do their job, and they might work with the local law enforcement hand in hand sometime on some undercover operations, or they might present something to law enforcement and then they come in, you'll call me and you'll say, you know, my detective came to me today and said that he wanted me to sign a search warrant. And I'm not sure exactly what this search warrant's about. So then I'll get a call and I'll highlight some of the issues that need to be addressed in the search warrant, what the investigators were looking for, so forth and so on. And then after the search warrant is executed, then we'll talk again and I'll talk about what charges are appropriate for this type of case and what you should expect, and along down the road, what kind of defense challenges you're going to get and how to get a guilty verdict.
So if I have my drug officers out there and they see what looks like a nice music collection, this may be something you could help me out with. Exactly,
exactly. And sometimes the drug officers call us and say, we know they're selling music. Can you help us and figure out what we need to do to develop the music surveillance so that we can go in and get the drug issue attacked and dealt with? And so that's when I get calls from the prosecutor as well, saying, you know, there's an officer that I know called you and talked to me, and we're trying to figure out how to get this drug dealer arrested. You know, what should I look for? What should I put in that affidavit?
Well, Frank, the cases, is there a typical kind of case, or are they different? How does that work?
Well, I would best describe it as almost your typical investigation. You start from your lower level vendors and you work your way up to what we would call the major distributors and manufacturers. At this particular point in time, we do try to address the manufacturers. One of the reasons that is so important is the number of CDs that can be manufactured at a low cost and be distributed to really affect the local economy, to affect the industry. As an example, one 52-speed CDR burner would be capable of burning a 74-minute CD in a little over a minute. We have just recently had a case in the Pennsylvania area where 291 burners were seized at one time. So you can imagine the effect that has not only the local economy but also the piracy losses in a particular region.
Frank, you've brought for us to see a CD burner that will make 7 copies of an original at one time. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Would you mind walking us through that? It's across the studio here. Just show us what it is and how it works so that we'll understand what we're looking for and what we're dealing with.
Yes, I will, yes. Normally when we go into a manufacturing location with law enforcement, we'll find several articles which indicate the manufacturing of these sound recordings. What you'll see here is what we refer to as a spindle. These spindles usually contain approximately 100 blank CD recordables, which are then loaded into what we would refer to as a CD burner. Burners are also referred to as towers. In this particular case, the original CD would placed in this top tower, and the blanks would be placed in these burning slots. A very simple process. Trays can be pushed in. Sometimes these CD recordables are defective and won't record, but a majority of the burners will record at any particular time. As you can see from the screen, the original is now being copied. It will show that 7 copies and 14 tracks will be copied in approximately 2.5 minutes. You can also see indication where the original disc is being read from the top of the burner, and the red lights indicate that these CDs are being burned. As I stated before, a 74-minute CD, in this particular case, can be burned at a rate of, this is a 40-time burner right here, can be burned at a rate of approximately 2.5 minutes. So every 2.5 minutes, in this particular case, a counterfeiter will be able to produce CDs, which he will fabricate into a finished product and be able to sell on the streets of any city for anywhere from $3 to $5 a piece. All of these burned except for one tray. That occasionally does happen, but at the end of the process, you are able to see, even though this is a poor quality of media here, you're able to see burn marks on the CD recordable.
So unlike a drug case, this can't be done on the street corner. You've got to have the equipment set up to do this, but how do they market it?
Well, strangely enough, the CD burner operations are very compact operations that are capable of operating in a very small area. I would say that you could have a CDR burning operation in a living room and still live in their living room. It's mostly a burn on demand situation. Instead of having large quantities of inventory, as in the past, they will burn copies of the most popular music at that particular time, and basically it will be distributed and work its way down to the street vendor level at some point.
You say street vendor. I've seen people on the streets who have a wagon or a cart or something and bunches of CDs. How do you know whether that's legal or not?
Well, we have distribution points in just about every particular way that you can think of. Flea markets, street vendors on the corner, vendors at the market, mom and pop stores. We've even had certain circumstances where there's been hard goods distribution online. For the most part, we will find out where the problem area is. If we have a large area where street vendors are the problem and we're getting complaints from local retailers, legitimate music retailers, we will attack that particular area with enhanced enforcement. It really depends on the situation, on how we handle the investigation.
Well, you get a tip or you get a call from me. What are you looking for?
Well, what we would do is we would go out and try to verify the complaint first. And the way we would do that is we would have one of our investigators or the informant or source of the information make a purchase for us. And based on our examination of the product, we would determine that it would be one of 3 formats or descriptions: a counterfeit, a pirate, or a bootleg. The most common that we see on the streets is the counterfeit. Now, the counterfeit is the complete reproduction of the original product, which would include the graphics, the trademark, and the actual copyrighted music. The pirate would be a product that has never legitimately been released, but would be a compilation, either one or numerous artists. And that particular CD could have anywhere of 25 or 30 separate songs on that particular product. Lastly, the bootleg. We do not see a lot of these or really take enforcement a lot of the times, but that is a live performance which could have been made at a concert, from a TV show, from a radio show. And that would normally sell for a much larger price than a counterfeit or a pirate, because that is more a collector's item for somebody that would, say for instance, want all of the Grateful Dead concerts or Rolling Stones concerts.
So the definition of music piracy would include those three categories of offenses.
Yes, it would.
There's also a fourth, though,
Oh.
if I can interrupt. There's online. So there's actually, when you say music piracy, it encompasses 4 different areas. I know a lot of prosecutors say, this is a bootleg, this is a bootleg, but that's not really the correct term. And I think that, that it should be addressed. And I tell prosecutors, it's important to use the correct terms, because that could affect what you're trying to prove, and your statute actually outlines what the exact item is that you're trying to prosecute. So we have to remember it's counterfeit, pirate, bootleg, and online.
Online, now how would that work?
Well, there's several different things. Online piracy is when somebody illegally downloads or uploads music and distributes it to millions of people. So we do have, on the federal side, some investigations, and we've had some prosecutions for online piracy. But for the most part, on the state level, the prosecutors are going to see the counterfeit, the pirate, or, as Frank said, sometimes the bootlegs. There's one state, though, that has criminal consequences for online piracy, for peer-to-peer sharing, so to speak, and that's California. So maybe in the future we'll see that coming across the country, but right now California is the jurisdiction that has prosecutions for online.
So one of the things you'd be looking for would be software to allow file sharing?
Yeah, it could be software that allows file sharing. It could be numerous things. It could be even so much as somebody offering something on a website that they can download to your computer.
And you would help me with the search warrant part of that when I
We
call
could help you with the search warrant part of that, yes.
Okay. I would imagine that there are a lot of prosecutors out there who simply don't know what their state has criminalized in this area. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I can tell you that most states have statutes for this type of crime. And as a matter of fact, 48 states do have statutes, and what we call them is true name and address statutes, because unlike on the federal side where you have copyright violations, criminal consequences and civil consequences, you don't have that on the state side unless you're dealing with something before 1972, because after that, federal law preempts the state law in the area of copyright. So what we have is what we call the true name and address statute. And the reason that we call it the true name and address statute is because the statutes across the United States say that for a legitimate piece of music to be sold legally, it must have on its packaging the true name and address of the manufacturer, and in some states, even the performer or group. And so that's where we get the name true name and address. There's also on the state side trademark statutes, and that would include anything from the trademark of the label that puts out the song to trademarks that the RIAA actually owns and administers for the label, such as the parental advisory stickers that you see on a lot of music, or dual disc symbols, enhanced sound symbols. So all those things can be used for trademark violations. What the prosecutor, though, has to be careful with is when they charge trademark, to try to charge trademarks that the RIAA owns, because we can't fly out all the record company executives all over the country for the hundreds of cases that exist. But our investigators can testify about the symbols that we, in fact, own.
So the offense would be the criminal using your trademark without your permission.
That's correct. And also the true name and address. The criminal not putting the true name and address of the manufacturer or the person who originally made that music. And some states have had appeals on the issue of manufacturer where it's not clear in the statutes. And so far, the appeals courts have said the manufacturer is actually the record company. So for them to say, well, I put my own name, doesn't work and doesn't hold water. And that's what you see sometimes.
Well, I'm curious. I would imagine people know what the penalties are for robbery or manslaughter, but wouldn't have a clue as to what these offenses would carry. Can you summarize what the punishments, the range of punishments would be?
Sure, and I think that's a good point, because the reason why some criminals and recidivists actually go to this type of crime is because it's a crime that carries low risk, but then it's a high profit, so the motivation is there. And they also think that they're not going to get a jail sentence. And so some of them even say this is, the cost of doing business, that I'm going to have to pay a lawyer or I'm going to have to go to court. So I think that's a good point that you're making. And what I think should be noted is that each state has different penalties. But for the most part, you can get a felony conviction if you have a certain amount of CD that you're selling and you don't have the correct true name and address on the CD, which can carry a jail sentence. So depending on where you are, you can have maybe up to 5 years in prison. And some judges in some jurisdictions have been ordering prison sentences for those people that are recidivist, for manufacturers and distributors out there, as well as restitution, which in some states is actually dictated in the statute that you can have a restitution award for a music piracy conviction. So those things exist, and the prosecutors should know that too, and know that you can also have forfeiture consequences for these. And in most states, it's written in the statute that the prosecutor can file forfeiture motions, can get restitution, and jail time.
When they file the restitution motions, I know this gets everybody's attention when they think about restitution in drug cases, but and forfeiture. When you're forfeiting, is it money or can it be other things also? Oh,
it can be money, it can be cars, it can be homes, equipment, it can be computers. And you have to remember, these people are trying to produce as many CDs as they can, so they're going to have the best equipment out there. So they're going to have the best computers, the most high-speed burners that they can possibly get, so they can produce the most product to sell and make money. The cars that they're transporting the items in are seized in a lot of jurisdictions. So those DA's offices and those states' attorneys can keep that equipment. We actually don't want it. We don't want this cash seized either. We want the restitution on the back end.
So you would help me not only with the search warrant, but with the forfeiture proceedings?
Yes, that's true.
Curiously, now, there was a case in California years ago where it was a representative of the victim provided some service to the district attorney's office, and there were problems about that. What about this situation? Is this different?
This is way different than that situation. In that situation, I believe that case was in California, and the victim actually took such a vital role in the case that they were making decisions on the case and actually working on trial strategies with the prosecutor, advising them as to what to do when they're in court, so forth and so on. What we do is different. I like to say to the prosecutors and the police officers, we give you a case and tie it in a bow in terms of the investigation and what needs to be done, and providing surveillance video so you have great evidence in court. But I'm not going to make decisions for you. When you call me, I'm strictly a resource. I'll tell you where to look in case law so you can make an argument. I'll tell you what arguments I've seen, because I keep a list of defense arguments. I'll tell you what the statutes say, or what's been changed, or how maybe you can approach a certain issue based on the evidence that we have and using our experts. And I'll advise you in that nature. Even if you get stumped in court and you call and need a resource, I'll do that. But I'm not going to make any decisions. I'm not going to participate in trial preparation. I'm not going to participate in any strategies with you, because it's not our case. We are, in fact, the victim, but we're a victim that has information because it's a novel type of crime and people don't know a lot about it. And so it's very different from that particular case.
Now, Deborah, you mentioned defense challenges, and I know that in narcotics cases, oftentimes there are defense attorneys who specialize, and they have this series of challenges that they bring up. What would I be likely to see from one of those lawyers in a piracy case?
Well, what you're likely to see is, and I'm keeping a list actually of all the defense challenges that I come across so that I can help and be that resource that I mentioned to the prosecutors, and they know what to expect. And I'm glad to say that the list isn't growing too much, which means that these crimes in these cases are pretty easy to go ahead and do and get a conviction. But one of the things that you're likely to see is that the defense attorney is going to say that his client did not know that he or she was selling illegal music. Now, that just is not going to hold water, because, like I said, we have an expert who will testify from the RIAA. But in many cases, I've had judges say, I can see that right there, that's not a legal piece of music just by me looking at it, even before the expert testifies. Because there's a lot of elements on that particular CD that you can really tell don't ring true and aren't a legal piece of music. So that doesn't hold a lot of water. Also, you have to remember, and I tell prosecutors to do this, is when they're doing search warrants, have the police take things like price list, where they'll list what they're selling and they'll say the price. And that's great evidence to use and a great comeback to this defense argument that they didn't know what they were selling. Well, yes, they did. They had the price list and they said, you know, I'll sell 2 for $5. And we know that in a store you can't get CDs that are 2 for $5. Also, you might have some burning equipment right there with them when they're selling items, but they'll have multiple copies of one CD, and I don't think that anybody needs 100 copies of one CD for personal use. So that's another way for the prosecutor to come back to that argument that defense attorneys love to throw out there, and I've never seen that argument taken seriously by a judge and actually used to get a not guilty. So that, I say, is probably like the biggest challenge that I see, but there's some other ones. And one is that state labeling statutes are preempted by federal law. Now, prosecutors are going to see this almost as often as that first one, because I think that some defense attorneys know what the law is, know that it's what's out there, and they try to confuse the judge a little bit or the court a little bit. And basically, the law has been pretty clear, is that state labeling statutes or true name and address statutes are not preempted by federal law. What is preempted is copyright, and that's a big difference, and that's not what you're charging. You're not charging copyright on these cases on the state side. If you're on the federal side, that's a different story. If you're a federal prosecutor, then we use copyright. But when you're on the state side, you're charging the true name and address statute, the state labeling statute, so to speak, and so it's not preempted by federal law. And in some jurisdictions, there are actually cases out there where appeals courts have ruled that this is in fact the case. So that's something else that's been thrown out there. Another thing is that the prosecutor or the defense attorney will say the prosecutor does not know whether all the product seized was illegal. Well, the statutes don't say that every piece of product that was seized has to be illegal. It doesn't say that if you have 10 good pieces and 10 bad pieces that you're not guilty. So that's an argument that doesn't fly. And a lot of times defense attorneys use that argument because when a search warrant happens, they'll get all the bad product, but then they'll get the one that was used to make that bad product, which is the real CD, and so they'll try to throw that argument out there, but it just won't work. Also, the defense attorneys will say that the CD was a DJ mix. Now, I don't know if you've heard of a DJ mixer. I'm sure you probably have, but a DJ mix is when a DJ might shout his name over the music and he mixes different songs together. And what they'll say is that that's just not illegal because my client is being creative. Well, your client may be creative. However, the argument to that is that he didn't have permission to be creative in that nature, and he still has to have the true name and address on the outside of the packaging, and he can't use member company trademarks or RIAA trademarks. That argument doesn't work either. The other argument is that the defendant shouldn't be guilty just because he possessed the counterfeit product. You get that a lot of times, but that also doesn't work because some statutes, especially on the trademark side, have presumptions about how many numbers are possessed and what that could mean or what kind of presumption could come from that. Other states actually mention possession and possession with the intent to do other things. And I tell prosecutors, it's a totality of circumstances. Take all your pieces of evidence, even circumstantial or direct, to show intent, such as the price list, such as there was a stand set up when the police officer got there and the person was yelling out what he had for sale, such as books that are found with accounting about what was sold that day. So just because the person wasn't actually observed making the sale doesn't mean they possess the items just for personal use or not to sell. So that's another argument. The other argument is that the defendant made copies of copies and not originals. Now, I've had that argument come up in court, and that's real easy to refute because it doesn't matter where the copy comes from, it's still against the law. So that doesn't work. And I actually had that in a case where the defendant said, I made copies of copies and it's okay, and I didn't do this, and they went on to file all sorts of motions and so forth, but they forgot they had a book in their possession about how to sell illegal music, believe it or not, that they had put together, a little, I guess, a notebook to give out to her vendors. So that really didn't hold water in that case. But the other argument is that restitution shouldn't be owed to the RIAA because the defendant's product was seized before it was sold. And that's another thing that we get all the time because a lot of times they don't want to pay restitution to us. But the argument is that when the police officer or our investigator came up, he observed somebody selling things, and so they were in the business of selling these items, and but for that seizure, that particular defendant would have sold those items. So that's another argument that's been thrown out there but hasn't worked so far. And the final argument is that the CDs weren't manufactured in the state that the person was charged. Now that doesn't make sense, and I always tell my prosecutors, think of the analogy of drugs. If a defense attorney said, you know, you can't charge my client for drug selling, or my client should be not guilty for drug selling because, you know, for example, the drugs were put together or obtained or made in Pennsylvania and we're in Maryland, that just wouldn't hold water. And the same thing here. It doesn't matter where they were made. It matters where the person was selling them, where they were possessing them with the intent to sell, what they were doing, where the person was observed and sold and charged.
You mentioned a woman who prepared a book or instructions for her vendors.
Yeah.
Is this like narcotics in that you can work your way backwards and upwards to maybe the person who's in charge of the whole operation?
Yeah, and I think Frank can speak some more to that about how they might work backwards and see a vendor and then eventually get a manufacturer distributor.
Exactly. It's very common that we will find a vendor who is a recidivist, and based on those charges and the possibility of some jail time, they become a cooperating source. And more often than not, they will take us to the next level above them, which is the distribution level. That may be in an apartment, in a house, it may be in a basement, it may be in a commercial storage facility. Now, what normally will happen is there will be boxes and boxes of a particular title. The vendor will go in, he will purchase the CDs that he would want, 2, 3, 4, 5 copies of each. Pay anywhere from $1 to $2 a piece to the distributor, and then on the street sell those anywhere from $3 to $5 a piece. So there's a great profit involved in it. What we try to do is to link the distributor to the actual manufacturer, which is often pretty successful because there has to be the supply and demand to the distribution spot. That is accomplished by a lot of surveillance, and we do have trained individuals that do that surveillance. Sometimes the activity is in the middle of the night, sometimes it's during the day. These individuals become versed in the surveillance and counter-surveillance, and it really is like a narcotics case in many, many ways. Eventually, we try to develop the information for the manufacturing location by several ways. Seeing raw product being taken into the location. There are certain characteristics of the boxes, the containers that hold the raw product, the weight of the containers, the size of the containers, occasionally discarded trash and debris, which indicate the manufacturing based on empty CD recording spindles that the blank media comes on. Maybe discarded insert cards with artwork or trademarks on it, and assorted trash of that nature. Once we are able to pin down the exact location, we do put the probable cause together, supply that to the detective and the appropriate law enforcement agency, and hopefully assist them as technical experts once they do serve the search and seizure warrant.
We have talked about experts, and you just mentioned the technical experts. What are the different kinds of experts that I might need in a case like this?
Well, to put this case on, you're going to need one expert, and that's an expert from the recording industry. And Frank here has been qualified as an expert in different jurisdictions, and I'll let him talk about what the things are that he will offer to your case while he's on the stand about the individual items or product or evidence that you've seized.
Many of our investigators have been qualified as experts in state, local, and federal court. We are called upon to testify in grand jury proceedings prior to any indictment. We're critical at the period of time at trial to identify the product. We train law enforcement to be able to recognize basic characteristics of pirated music, counterfeit music, and bootleg music. But in reality, it's up to us to come in as a representative of the industry to actually identify that product and explain to the jury or to the court why that is an illegal product. I have some examples of that today. I would be more than glad to identify that product, the characteristics, and why it's easy to identify an illegal sound recording compared to a legitimate.
So you would walk the jury or the court through what you see to be the clear violations, and you have some of these.
Yes, I do.
What do you have?
We have some examples of, we'll start out with some counterfeits of some product. Normally, when an individual, a consumer, goes to a store, a retail store that does sell music, he will see several things. We'll see that the product is wrapped in cellophane, such as we have here. I have loosened this a bit to be able to show you some of the other characteristics. It will be tightly wrapped and shrink sealed. You will see the stickers on the product, which will indicate a barcode, a price, and maybe the retail location. Once you would remove that product, one of the first observations you would make is that the graphics is extremely crisp and clear. You are able to read even the smallest print on the artwork. On the top of the CD, you would see a security tape which would have a barcode. It would have information concerning the artist. Once we open the CD, what we will be able to see is not only the CD, but also the artwork, which is also on a heavy cardboard stock. The CD has a multiple color ink on it compared to what I will show you in several minutes. The fold-out and legitimate CD will be of a thick cardboard. It will have lyrics. It will have copyright information. And as you can see, it's difficult to see here, but everything is crisp and clear, even down to the copyrights and trademarks, which are very, very small on the back of the artwork. In removing the CD, it becomes clear that this is a professionally manufactured sound recording based on the fact that the screen print, it was manufactured at a plant by a machine basically that cost over $1 million, called a monoliner. So once we know what a legitimate compact disc looks like, then we're able to show what a illegal sound recording looks like. I have an example of the same CD, but this is a counterfeit format. And the first glaring thing about this particular CD is the artwork that is on the back of the legitimate is now the artwork on the front of the counterfeit. The counterfeiter will use a shrink fold over. He will use a cellophane fold over, which in no way is used by the industry. But this is very common. We do see these particular shrink wrap packets in this particular format. There will be literally thousands of boxes full of these. This is one of the indicators that it is an illegal product.
Is there a legitimate use for those things?
There most likely is a legitimate use, but it's nothing that we use in our part of the industry. Now, this particular artwork on this CD, you will see, has white borders across the top. This is because they don't use a legitimate means to manufacture these. Often they are made on professional color copiers or less. There's no quality control, and they just basically cut these because they want to have large quantities of insert cards available within a short quantity of time. This is just an example of some of those insert cards. They will be loosely bundled, and you will find stacks of every artist. You will find insert cards that are counterfeits. You will find insert cards that bear trademarks. As you can see, the parental advisory trademark here is a trademark that is owned by the Recording Industry Association of America. These are indicators that we often see. Going into the actual package, when we open it, we see several things. To begin with, the insert card is blank on the rear. It is a very thin sheet of paper. And then we look at the actual CD. We see that there is absolutely nothing on the CD to indicate who the particular artist is or what the name of the actual work is. When we turn the CD over, we will have a green tinge, which is consistent with a CD recordable. We do not, in the industry, legitimately manufacture or distribute music to be sold commercially on CD recordables. Let me just go back to something here for just a second that I did leave out. There is a small mark on here that I'd just like you to take a look at. It's at the very bottom of the CD. It's very difficult to see, but what that is what we refer to as a thermal imprinter. It's just a small machine that you would put the name of the particular artist and it would imprint it on the CD. This can be scraped off with a fingernail.
Jim, I'd like to just piggyback off something that Frank is mentioning here, which I think is an important point to mention for prosecutors when they're doing one of these cases, is to actually, and I think the jury gets a better sense of the evidence when they do this, is to actually have the investigator while he's in the stand and while he's giving his testimony, actually hold everything side by side and give the jury or the judge an actual comparison right before their eyes. And the differences are so glaring that you also hear, sometimes you hear jurors gasp or say, oh my goodness, I didn't know that. Judges will say, I had no idea. And some of the important points that I've seen brought out in court, which really are effective, are to have the expert actually show the back of the CDR recordable, which is just a CD that you can buy in Staples or whatever we have at our desk, and show how it's blue-green, and how he talked about that, and have the expert show the real one and how it's silver on the back because it's stamped as opposed to you know, the blue-green color, and actually show the jurors either using a PowerPoint presentation or the actual evidence where the actual recording stops on the CD, because you can see on a CDR where the recording stops, the color is different, and where it starts. And I find that that's really effective. I've had judges say, you know, I don't need to hear anymore after that, and we just go to the next witness. And I find that defense attorneys don't have a lot to cross-examine on after that either. So I think that's a good point to mention.
It would seem that a document camera, that you could put the counterfeit and the legitimate one down side by side and then zoom it out to 7 feet by 5 feet or 7 feet by 9 feet would be very, I never had a judge say, I don't need to hear anymore, but I could see the impact that would make. And talking about impact, how do you get a jury to be interested and excited about this type of offense?
Well, I think that jurors are often interested to begin with because they're consumers, and they see themselves as possibly being duped by these defendants or possibly buying one of these. But these are also things that they know about, that they can touch and feel and see every day, as opposed to drugs, where a lot of people don't have any experience, unless you're in a prosecutor's office or you're a police officer, about what an actual drug packet looks like up close. But when somebody, a juror, has a CD in their house and they can relate to it, I think that they start out being interested. And then the expert testimony seems to really get them going, and then they become especially interested. So I think that the expert testimony serves two prongs, if you will, in that it gets the jurors into your case, but it also is very necessary. I find some prosecutors think that because it's so obvious that you can see that an item is counterfeit, that they don't need the expert, but you do need the expert to prove your case, unless there's a stipulation from the defense about the expert testimony.
The graphics quality obviously is inferior. What about the audio quality?
Actually, the audio quality is just complete digital reproduction of the original work. So it's a good sound recording. There is a difference in the type of the quality of media that's used. There are cases where we have CD recordables, and I do have an example of that, where the actual foil has come off of the CD recordable, making the CD not playable. But if it's a reasonable format, it is a complete digital reproduction of the original work.
And I know we duplicate training CDs and DVDs, and when you do it in bulk, sometimes some of them are not good.
That's correct.
And these people probably have no quality control, so you could pay your $5 and it might not even play in your player.
Some very good points you brought up. Number one is you have no way of going back to this particular person to get your money back, and that's one of the real reasons for the true name and address. So if you do have a defective product, you can go back to the manufacturer and get a refund for your money. Secondly, an interesting part of the statute would refer to sound recordings. So we advise law enforcement at the time of the seizure, throw the CD in a CD player, make sure there's sounds on there, because occasionally they are blank. And certainly you don't want to go to trial with a blank CDR. So it is important that at the very least you determine that there are sounds embodied on that CD recordable.
Now, Deborah, we've talked about a lot of things today, and we've talked about the law a little bit, but could you summarize the law for us one more time?
Sure. When you're in state court, there's copyright statutes in state court, but copyright law on the state side is preempted by federal law. So what the prosecutors should be charging are the true name and address statutes, which talk about that the actual name and address of the actual manufacturer and or group in some situations should be on the packaging of all those CDs, and the trademark statutes on the state side. Also on the federal side, there's also trademark statutes there, but prosecutors, instead of doing true name and address on the federal side of things, are going to use copyright to charge the defendants.
Now, all this information and all this resource that you can provide for us, if I've got a case, I can call you the Friday before Monday trial. Is that right?
Oh, no, don't do that, but some prosecutors do try, especially if you're a federal prosecutor. Because on the federal side of things, remember, we're charging under copyright and trademark. So with copyright, we've got to get witnesses from the record companies who are the actual owners of those particular pieces of evidence at issue. Not only do we have to get them in, but to get an indictment, you have to have affidavits from those record companies, an attorney from business affairs to say, I didn't know that defendant. We never knew that defendant. We didn't give that defendant permission to use any of our copywritten work, to sell it, to manufacture it, so forth and so on. We also need to take some of that evidence and test it against the actual master in the vault at the record company. And an engineer will do that at the record company and then fill out an affidavit. Once it's done, they then become the witnesses for trial. So to call the night before is a little hectic, and we also have to get you certified copies of copyright registrations from the Copyright Office. So that can be a little difficult as well to call the Friday before a trial. On the state side of things, sometimes it's more manageable because we do have offices in every region, and we can send out an investigator if they haven't already looked at the evidence. Sometimes I know police officers aren't always able to communicate everything with prosecutors because they're so busy, or there's just a breakdown sometimes between the file and how it makes its way to the prosecutor. But our investigators can come out the day before a trial if they have to. I don't advise it, but if they have to, and survey the evidence for a prosecutor.
In addition to the RIAA site, you have a law enforcement site that investigators can go to for information.
Exactly. There's a site for the company, which is www.riaa.com, but there's also a law enforcement website that was just created for prosecutors and law enforcement officials, and that is www.leapu.com. You'll get a password to go into there, and you can use that website to get language for affidavits, to get language for indictments, to get case law, any sort of thing that you can think of will be on there.
Now, how many regions do you have?
Within the whole country, there's a northeast region, a central region where I'm located, a southern region, and a western region. And
if I'm an investigator or a prosecutor, I can actually get your publication, The Enforcer.
Yes, that's correct.
Frank, how do I get this?
Any law enforcement agency or prosecutor that wishes the enforcer to come to them monthly with updates, cases of interest, should just contact us via email. We will put them on the email list, and they will receive it every month. If they have additional questions concerning any of the cases or training or anything of that nature, they can contact the regional office in their jurisdiction, and we would be more than glad to help them.
Frank, can you give us an idea of the economic impact of piracy?
It's estimated that hard goods piracy dealing with only music in the U.S. is in excess of about $300 million yearly. And it's estimated that worldwide music-only hard goods is about $4.5 billion.
A lot of money, and you
It
don't
sure
think
is.
about that. And I suppose that's one way to get the jury interested and excited about this kind of case.
It's a big effect on everything, the tax base, the neighborhood, legitimate retailers. More on a local level, it affects the town, the city, the people greatly. It's great economic loss.
Because criminals don't pay taxes on what they gain, and so the local governments suffer.
Music piracy, a huge economic impact on the citizens of the community and on individuals, and what a resource we have here for investigators and prosecutors. We'd like to thank Frank Walters and Deborah Robinson of RIAA, the Recording Industry Association of America, for being here with us today and sharing the information that they have about being an assistance to us, a good resource out there. Please contact them when they can help you out. This is Jim Dedman with the National District Attorneys Association.
The National District Attorneys Association, voice of America's prosecutors.
Sir, could you state your name for the court, please?
My name's Frank Walters.
And Mr. Walters, could you tell us by whom you're employed, if anybody?
I'm employed by the Recording Industry Association of America.
And what exactly is the Recording Industry Association of America?
The Recording Industry Association of America, also known as RIAA, is a trade association that represents the 4 major recording companies that manufacture and produce in excess of 90% of all the recorded music in the United States.
And what's your job title there?
I am the Director of Investigations for the Central Region, and my main responsibility is to supervise anti-piracy investigations.
And as the director there, I know you just stated that your main job or your duty is to supervise investigations, but what else do you do there? What's the nature of your work besides that?
The nature of the work is to also provide training to law enforcement, to supervise a substantial number of criminal cases, to help plan strategies, and to assist prosecutors and law enforcement in any type of investigation they may have.
And how long have you been engaged in doing this type of work?
I have been with the company for 16 years.
Okay. And did you have any specialized training for this position?
Prior to starting with the RIAA, I was a Maryland State Trooper for 13 and a half years. I was in a special unit that mainly dealt with complex covert investigations. In 1991, I did take a position with this company. I received training from individuals within the industry. I did have the opportunity to go to legitimate music manufacturing facilities to see the legitimate manufacturing process, and the opportunity to go to illicit music manufacturing locations to see that process also.
Okay, now you just testified that you supervise investigations, but have you had the opportunity to participate yourself in any investigations regarding this type of crime?
Yes, I have.
And how many times would you say you've done that?
Several thousand at least.
Several thousand?
Yes.
Okay. And are those in any particular jurisdiction?
Every jurisdiction practically that you can think of, California, New York, Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, Texas, a lot of the 50 states, including Hawaii.
Oh, okay. All right. And during the course of those investigations, did you have the opportunity to observe how illegal sound recordings are sold, distributed, or manufactured?
All of the above.
Okay. And how many times did you observe those particular aspects of this work?
Literally hundreds and hundreds
Okay.
of times.
All right. Have you ever been qualified as an expert before in the identification of unauthorized sound recordings?
Yes, I have, both in state, local, and federal courts and multi-jurisdictions.
Okay. And how many times would you say you've been qualified before?
In federal court, no less than 20 times. State and local courts, upwards of 100.
At this point, you've laid the foundation to offer your investigator as an expert. And that's what you'll do. You'll offer your investigator as an expert in the identification of illegal sound recordings. Then the defense attorney will have the opportunity to cross-examine your witness. Once the investigator is qualified as an expert, you will ask questions about the specifics of the case and or the results of the examination of the evidence. Mr. Walters, what is an unauthorized sound recording?
Unauthorized sound recordings are basically three different descriptions: counterfeit, pirate, and bootleg. Of those descriptions, the counterfeit is the unauthorized duplication of the artwork, the trademarks, and the original music, with some attempt to make it look like the legitimate product. The pirate is a compilation of one artist or numerous artists in a format that has never been legitimately released by one of our member companies. It often contains the copyrighted music owned by our members and seldom displays the true name and address of who manufactured that particular sound recording. Lastly, the bootleg, which is sometimes used as a generic term for all music that is unauthorized, but in fact is its own description of a live performance that has been recorded from a concert, a TV, or a radio that was never intended to be released.
Okay, so is it your testimony then today that CDs that are illegal aren't just called bootlegs, there's different types? Is that what you're saying, just for clarification?
Yes, yes.
Okay. All right. And how do you make an identification of an unauthorized sound recording?
Well, one of the easiest ways is not only the training that I've received in the past and seeing the legitimate manufacturing process, but also the counterfeit product or the pirate product compared with a legitimate CD. There are certain characteristics that make it clear legal versus legitimate.
And can you tell the court and the jury what those characteristics are?
Yes, I can. I have one of the CDs that was purchased in this particular case. One of the first indicators to me was the insert card on the CD had white borders. The graphics were blurry, and it basically was of such poor quality that the actual small graphics on the back are completely unreadable. The next step is I actually opened the CD up. I noticed that the insert card was on a thin sheet of paper, blank on the back, and that the actual CD only bore a small graphic at the bottom giving the name of the particular title. In turning the CD over, I recognized it to be a CD recordable because of the blue tinge, the bluish green tinge, which isn't consistent with a legitimate CD. I did put the CD in a CD player and determined that there were sounds embodied on the CD.
And do you have a legitimate CD here with you today?
Yes, I do. It happens to be the very same title of the purchase CD. What you first find is that the CD was in fact initially shrink wrapped with price stickers on the outside of the shrink wrap. There was also the security tab along the top of the legitimate CD, which indicated the name of the title and barcodes. When I opened the CD up, I was able to comment that the insert card is a multi-fold, heavy cardboard insert that has graphics, lyrics, copyright information, and such as that, compared to the single sheet of paper in this particular CD. I noticed that the actual CD was what I would refer to as a molded CD, which is made commercially by a machine strictly for the purposes of making CDs. It is silver on the back, and it has been screen printed by the factory with graphics, trademark, and readable print, regardless of how small it is.
Now that legitimate CD, that's something you brought with you today, or was that something that was found at the crime scene?
No, I actually purchased this from a legitimate retailer within the community.
Okay. And then the one you just showed us, which has previously been marked as an exhibit in this case, could you just hold that side by side with the real one for the jury to see, please?
Well, strangely enough, in this particular case, the counterfeit had the rear graphics on the front and the front graphics on the legitimate on the rear, with also some changes that were made apparently by the counterfeiter with a list of the particular songs for this CD. So based on my observations, I was able to make the expert determination that this is an illegal sound recording.
Okay, and just one more time, can you take the disc out and hold them side by side for the jury?
Yes, I will.
Just to show them what you testified regarding the backs of the CDs.
The legitimate CD will be silver in color, and the CD recordable is a blue greenish tinge.
Okay. Now, on the piece that's been marked into evidence, looks like there's a ring on the outside. Is that significant at all?
In some cases, you can actually see where the burn on the CD took place. It usually burns from inside out, and if you look at a CD that is in its original unburned format, there will not be that type of break.
Okay. Okay. Now, did you have the opportunity to participate in the investigation of State v. Music Pirate?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And what was your role in that investigation?
I was actually contacted by the police department, who advised that they had arrested a street vendor with a considerable number of CDs. And based on training we had supplied them, they suspected the CDs were illegal.
Okay. And you said they called you. Where did they call you?
Well, we have an office that deals specifically with sound recording piracy, and based on the training we supplied, they realized, law enforcement, that we are the contact to identify that product for them.
Okay, and did you then report to the crime scene or to the police department?
Actually, the evidence had been seized. We responded to the station where we were able to examine the product personally.
Okay. And when you say you examined it personally, does that mean you did it or somebody that works for you did the examination?
In this particular case, I examined the evidence myself.
Okay. And did you have the occasion to do an inventory of the evidence that you examined?
I did, and I determined that there were multiple copies of titles. There were price stickers on some of the articles. There was a sheet that indicated that the CDs were $5 a piece or 3 for $10, which is not consistent with a legitimately manufactured sound recording. And I was also able to identify the indicators as a counterfeit. Lastly, I did put the CD and a CD player and determined that there were sounds embodied on the particular CDs.
Okay. And did you come up with a count of how many items were there that you inventoried as well?
Approximately 550.
Okay. And when you say that the stickers were on the ones that you examined and they weren't consistent with music industry stickers. Can you just explain exactly what you mean by that?
Well, the suspect CDs had small weight stickers that you would buy at an office supply store with a handwritten ink amount of $5. At the stand was a piece of cardboard with magic marker indicating 3 for $10.
Okay.
That is not consistent with a legitimate sound recording, which would have the price stickers and barcodes on the outside of the cellophane.
Okay. Was the price consistent with legitimate sound recordings?
No, no.
Okay. All right. When it wasn't consistent, does that mean it was higher or lower than a legitimate sound recording?
Much, much lower.
Much
Much
lower.
lower, yes.
Okay. And did you have the opportunity to look at any of the titles that were in the evidence, if you remember?
Yes, I did. I was able to look at a representative sample, about 10% of everything that was there. I determined that those particular CDs were of well-known recording artists, many of which were signed by our member companies, were artists well known to the public in general. On the back of these particular CDs, it indicated that they had been manufactured by companies such as Warner Brothers and Universal. And I can tell you now that our representative companies do not manufacture counterfeits of their legitimate product.
Okay. And I want you to take a look again at the item that's already been marked as an exhibit in this case that we were talking about just a little while ago.
Yes.
And that was put on a property receipt as well, and you see the property receipt number, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, is that one of the items you examined?
Yes, it is.
And were there other items similar to that in the evidence that you examined?
Out of the total seizure, probably 25 of this particular title.
Okay. And based on your examination of that item and then the other items in the evidence, did you form an opinion about the evidence?
I did form an opinion that the product sound recordings seized by law enforcement at the time of that arrest were in fact counterfeit in nature.
Okay, and what is the basis of your opinion?
My opinion is based on all of the descriptors of a legitimate CD compared to the CD seized by the police department on the specific day and time.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Walters.
Yes.
Now you've qualified your expert, you've gotten information out about your evidence, you've gotten expert testimony from your witness, and it's time to turn your witness over to the defense attorney for cross-examination.
The National District Attorneys Association, voice of American prosecutors.
Music piracy is a crime. It is occurring in small and large cities by people who are probably committing other crimes as well. I work for the Recording Industry Association of America. Let us help you successfully prosecute music piracy crimes.
able to examine the product personally.
Okay. And when you say you examined it personally, does that mean you did it? Somebody that works for you did the examination?
In this particular case, I examined the evidence myself.
Okay. And did you have the occasion to do an inventory of the evidence that you examined?
I did, and I determined that there were multiple copies of titles. There were price